Have you ever felt that some discoveries don't happen by chance, as if certain objects buried by anonymous hands silently awaited the exact moment when that humanity was ready to meet them? If you feel that certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is what your soul needed to hear today. There are artifacts that shouldn't exist, pieces so old, so sophisticated, so out of date, context, that seem to whisper a forgotten truth. They are like seeds left by civilizations that disappeared in the wind, like messages buried in layers of silence. And every time an archaeologist removes dust from an impossible object, something within us awakens, as if an ancestral memory stirs in the back of the mind. Who put these pieces there? Why were they made using techniques that do not match the when did they emerge? And most importantly, why no one can understand fully its origin? Imagine holding in your hands an artifact so ancient that it predates written history itself, but so precise that not even modern machines could easily replicate it. Imagine finding engravings that describe the movement of the stars with incredible accuracy. That would only be possible thousands of years later. Or discover metallic objects fused with temperatures inaccessible to primitive technology. Each piece is like a mirror that it does not reflect the past. It reflects what we have forgotten to be. And science, with all its strength, is forced to pause, taking a step back, to admit that perhaps the human timeline has cracks through which erased stories have leaked, because some artifacts are so disconcerting that they seem to defy the very fabric of time. They are portals. Portals for questions that do not fit into the comfort of answers common. As you listen to this story, allow a small opening to occur in your interior. Allow mystery to find space. Because maybe what we call a riddle don't be an obstacle, but an invitation. What if these mysterious artifacts are not archaeological errors but signs? Signs left by hands that knew that one day we would look at them for meaning, as who looks to the sky in search of a lost memory? What do these objects want to reveal? And more deeply, what does your soul recognize in them? There are moments in history when the earth itself decides to speak, and she speaks through objects that don't fit together, pieces that seem to have been left there as clues to a story much bigger than we imagine. Each mysterious artifact found in excavations is like a small fissure in what we believe we know about the past, and when a fissure opens, light enters. That's why these objects are so annoying, because even in silence, they illuminate. One of the most disconcerting examples is the so-called Antikythera mechanism, found by Greek fishermen at the beginning of the 20th century. At first, it just seemed like a corroded block, but when researchers looked closer, they discovered gears so fine, so precisely calculated, that not even medieval clocks could approach that level of complexity. The object, built more than 2,000 years ago, could predict eclipses, calculate celestial movements, and decipher astronomical cycles with a precision that should not have existed at that time. It's as if someone had placed at the bottom of the sea a testimony, a kind of reminder that humanity is not as linear as we think. When archaeologists analyzed it, they realized that no known civilization it had, technology capable of producing such sophisticated gears at that time, was how to find a smartphone inside a pharaonic tomb. And the most intriguing thing is not just the precision, it's the intention. That device was not decorative. It was an instrument made to guide someone who needed to understand heaven to understand yourself. Another example is the famous Dashka stone found in the Ural Mountains, a gigantic stone wall with a perfectly detailed map of rivers, mountains, and reliefs. But the map depicts geographic features that we were only able to confirm with modern technology. Even more disturbing, on the physical map, there are layers engraved images that appear to represent irrigation systems, artificial canals, and dams that have never existed in any historical record. As someone thousands of years ago, could you have access to an aerial view of an entire region? How could I have known geological sites so deep without satellites, planes, or modern cartography? It is at this point that the mystery begins to breathe. And perhaps the most impressive case comes from 1938, when explorers found the called Dropa discs on the plateau of Bayankara Ula, circular pieces, similar to vinyl records, with spiral grooves and microscopic inscriptions that resemble codes. Many researchers have attempted to translate them. Some have suggested that the inscriptions narrated the arrival of a POV, the of the clouds, or of the stars, although the interpretation is controversial. But what matters is not the exact translation. It's the fact that they exist. Precision-cut discs, recorded with a refined technique dating back more than 12,000 years. Who, at that time, would have had the skills to produce something so detailed? And why? Each of these artifacts awakens the same sensation, an internal displacement, a doubt that makes room for something bigger. Because when looking at these pieces, we are not only in front of ancient objects, we are facing an intelligence that perhaps has walked before ours. And even if we don't know your name, your face, your story, we feel your presence. It's as if someone, far away from us in time, had tried say, "You didn't start where you think. There's more." If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may be here. The most impressive thing is that, when these artifacts appear, the official discourse always tries to forcefully fit them into ready-made explanations. But there are objects that refuse to fit. There are discoveries that require courage to be seen as they really are. And when something challenges the limits of human knowledge, we have only two options: deny or expand. Because perhaps the true purpose of these artifacts is not to prove anything to us, but to invite to remember. Remembering that history is not a straight line, but a living tissue, where forgotten threads sometimes resurface to reveal a larger design. And here is the question that guides us to the next block. If these artifacts do not belong to the technology of their era, then what era belong? There are artifacts that seem to mock human chronology, as if they had been forgotten in a place where they didn't belong. They arise in geological layers too old, at depths that contradict any official timeline. And when these objects come to light, they are not just archaeological finds. They are messages displaced from time, messages that watch us silently, waiting. May we finally ask what we never dared to ask: what if we weren't the first? One of the most enigmatic cases is the so-called Dorchester vase, found in 1851, a metallic piece with two different alloys, crafted with a perfection that would remind current industrial techniques. The problem? It was found inside a rock dating back to more than 100 million years old. How could such a refined object exist before even humanity itself? Some tried to explain it as an error, others as fraud, but the truth is that no one has been able to prove anything, and the vase remains as a small metallic whisper, hinting that perhaps our story is just a revision partial truth. There is also the mystery of the so-called Klerksdorp balls, small metal spheres found in layers 2 to 3 billion years old. Yes, billions. They are perfectly symmetrical, some with horizontal grooves so uniform that they appear to have been produced by machines. Conventional science tries to classify them as natural formations, but many geologists admit in hushed tones that they have never seen anything like it. Like nature would produce objects so geometrically perfect, so similar to industrial components, at a time when complex multicellular organisms didn't even exist. Another disturbing find is the London hammer, found in the United States, embedded in a type of rock that dates back hundreds of thousands of years. The object inside looks modern: petrified wooden handle, pure metal head, die cast which defies the techniques of the time in which it was supposedly used by humanity. The hammer seems to exist in the wrong place in history, and when something appears out of place, forces us to face the impossible. And then there is the Peary Race map, a 16th century document that represents the coasts of South America with a precision that would only be possible with aerial images. The map also shows part of Antarctica without ice, something that, according to our studies, would only have been visible more than 6,000 years ago, when its coastline was not yet covered by thick modern glacial layer. If the map was constructed based on documents more old, who produced these documents? And who had the ability to observe the Earth from an impossible perspective for its time? Each object is a gap in the puzzle, an absence of explanation that becomes presence of mystery, and the pattern is always the same. The older the layer, the more sophisticated the object, as if we were going contrary to logic, as if, instead of linear evolution, we were faced with an echo, an echo of civilizations that perhaps they reached technological levels high enough to leave traces that survived their own oblivion. And it is interesting to note how, when faced with these enigmas, the reaction is always divided. Part of community tries to forcefully fit the inexplicable within familial frames yars. Another part try to unravel. But there is still a third group, the silent group, those who they look at these objects and feel something familiar, as if the artifacts weren't intruders in time but returns of something we already knew and forgot. Perhaps these impossible objects are like echoes of knowledge that precedes ours, as if time were not just a river that flows forward, but an ocean that carries traces of ancient waves. And this leads us to an inevitable question. If these objects appeared before human time, who left them there? There are discoveries that not only generate questions, they generate discomfort, because some artifacts don't just defy logic, they defy narrative. They expand what we know, they dismantle what we believe we know. When an object appears in an excavation bringing with it a story that does not fit into the traditional script of humanity, the reaction is not celebration, it is silence. Silence followed by resistance. After all, admitting the impossible requires courage, and not everyone is ready. One of the most emblematic examples is the set of artifacts found in the tunnels of Saqqara, Egypt. There, among common pieces and fragments of wood, archaeologists found objects with aerodynamic shapes so perfect that they resembled models of modern gliders. One of them, made of light wood, has a fuselage, vertical tail and wing tilt that coincides with real aerodynamic principles. Centuries before any formal flight study. The official explanation? Toys. The intimate explanation. The one that whispers in the heart of those who feel there is more. Messages. Messages from an intelligence that had no place in his time. Another fascinating example comes from Bolivia, at the Puma Punku complex, where blocks huge pieces of stone were cut with such precise angles and millimeter fittings that even today modern engineers wonder how that was possible. The hardness of rocks would require, at a minimum, industrial-grade tools. However, according to the version's official, pre-Columbian builders did everything with stone hammers. It's in this Atiao, which point the story begins to sound more improbable than the mystery, because perfection of those cuts isn't just technique, it's intentional, and every work with intention carries a message from whoever created it. In Crete, archaeologists discovered the enigmatic disc of Festus, a clay artifact with spiral symbols, engraved with a precision that suggests the use of some kind of stamp or matrix, something non-existent at the time. A unique writing system, with codes that no one has fully deciphered. Some scholars believe that it is not language, but instructions, a manual for something that no longer exists, a lonely piece that asks for memory. And then we come to the most delicate point. When an artifact threatens to reshape the narrative, it is often forgotten before being understood, saved in deposits, silenced in reports, ignored in conferences, not out of malice, but out of fear, afraid to admit that perhaps humanity has already traveled further than we can remember. Fear of accepting that the past may not be linear but cyclical, with rises and falls that disappeared under layers of dust and time. If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may be here. The case of impossible maps, found in different parts of the world, reinforces this discomfort. Maps that show regions with precision that we only reach after invention of modern instruments. Back-designed with unbelievable details, mountains and islands aligned with almost cartographic accuracy. The official explanation? Copies of even older maps of unknown origin. But if this is true, it means that someone, in the distant past, had access to global knowledge. Someone who looked at the planet not from the ground, but from above. Another confusion occurs in India, where artifacts called vimanas appear in ancient texts, described as machines capable of flight, navigating the skies with motors powered by specific metals and light sources. Many treat this as mythology. But when mythology describes engineering in technical detail, perhaps not we should discard it so quickly. Maybe myths are memories worn away by the wind. And behind all this there is a silent, almost forbidden question. Why are some artifacts celebrated while others are swept under the radar? Academic dust? Maybe because certain objects don't just expand knowledge, expand the unknown. And the unknown is scary, but mystery is not an enemy. It is an invitation, a portal, a glimpse of what we forget to be. When we hold an impossible artifact, we are not just touching the past. We are touching what we were, what we could have been, what perhaps still lets be. And this is where the next step reveals itself. If these objects do not fit into the official story so what is the story that are they trying to count? There are artifacts that not only defy logic, they seem to carry the echo of civilizations that disappeared before there were even records. Objects so old, so refined, so enigmatic that they seem to whisper the same silent phrase, "There was others before you." And when these objects emerge from the forgotten lands, no, they reveal only technology. They reveal memory. A memory buried so deep that only amazement is capable of bringing her back. One of the most impressive examples is the set of submerged structures of Yonaguni in Japan. Discovered by divers in the 1980s, these formations resemble monumental staircases, geometric platforms, and walls that seem carved with precision. Some experts insist that they are natural formations, but it's hard to ignore straight lines, perfect angles and surfaces polished like human hands, or something similar, had shaped the stone in another era. If Yonaguni was built, it predates any known civilization in the region. And this is not just uncomfortable, it's transformative. A submerged city doesn't scream. It whispers from below. You have forgotten what you once were. Another enigma lies deep in the Peruvian desert, the Nazca Lines. From above, they form gigantic figures perfectly proportioned. From below, they are just furrows in the earth. But the real question is, who were they made for? Who could see those figures before the invention of modern flight? And why would anyone create images colossal if no one could see them from the ground? It's like messages addressed to the sky, or perhaps to those who traveled through it. Symbols of a civilization that I understood the world from the top down, not from the bottom up. And then we arrived at an even more mysterious place, Göbekli Tepe, in the heart of Turkey, a monumental temple built more than 12,000 years ago, millennia before the first cities, before structured agriculture, before anything we call civilization. Its T-shaped columns carved with animals and symbols reveal an artistic and spiritual complexity that should not exist at a time when, according to our chronology, humans still lived as hunters and gatherers. But there, on that artificial hill, we find evidence of a society capable of organizing specialized work, advanced architecture, and, above all, purpose. How could for such an ancient civilization to have access to so much wisdom? And why, after raising of the largest temples ever found, its builders decided to bury it, preserving it like a secret to be discovered only now? Deep in South Africa lies another enigma, the Mapungubwe ruins, and the Circle of Adam's calendar. Stone. Structures aligned with the solstices, forming patterns accurate astronomical. Studies suggest that these formations may have more than 70,000 years, which would drastically change everything we know about the first organization human. If this calendar is really that old, it means that astronomy was not born with the great classical civilizations, but with people we didn't even believe capable of complex constructions. It's like finding a Swiss watch in the birthplace of humanity. And yet it is there, silent, pointing to something we insist on not see. The enigma deepens when we analyze artifacts found in the middle of ruins megaliths, some with marks that are repeated around the world. Spiral symbols, snake patterns, identical geometric shapes in cultures that have never had contact each other. How people separated by oceans, eras, and continents could create symbols so similar? Is it a coincidence? Or are they traces of a common origin, of ancestral knowledge shared before the dispersal of humanity? Maybe these patterns aren't just art, maybe they're language, a language so old that we forget how to read it. And here comes the question that vibrates in the heart of those who perceive the pattern. And if these lost civilizations did not disappear, but left traces for a day we remember? There are those who say that these works are the result of imagination. There are those who try to reduce them to simplicity, but there are also those who feel something different when looking at them. One called a sign, an awakening memory, because some works are not just constructions, are testimonies testimonies that humanity has already walked through paths that we still cannot understand. And that leads us to the next mystery. If there were civilizations so ancient and so advanced, where are their stories? Where is your voice? Where are your teachings? There is something deeply unsettling, and at the same time fascinating, about the fact that symbols, identical ones, appear in cultures separated by oceans, eras, and completely different worlds. Different. How can the same pattern cross thousands of years, like a thread golden sewing humanity fabric aid? When we find these symbols in mysterious artifacts, we realize that perhaps the biggest enigma is not in the object, but in the language hidden within it. One of the most recurring patterns is the spiral. It appears in prehistoric caves, in European megaliths, in Amerindian cultures, in the ancient temples of Oceania, and even in carvings that precede writing itself. The spiral is the representation of the movement of the life, the expansion of consciousness, the eternal cycle of return. But like people so far away, did they arrive in the same way? Was it just a coincidence? Or is the spiral a memory that precedes words, a primordial symbol left by someone who understood that life does it not walk in a straight line, but in ascending circles? Another symbol that is repeated is the serpent, present in artifacts from Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Americas, and Asia. It can represent wisdom, vital energy, healing, metamorphosis. For some people, it was the path to enlightenment. For others, the guardian of the knowledge hidden deep within the earth. There are serpents carved into monoliths that predate formal civilizations, snakes painted on ceramics that belong to people who have never met. Why do so many ancient artifacts bear this figure? Perhaps because it symbolizes something greater than we believe, something that those people they knew and we forgot. And then there is the most perplexing pattern of all, the winged, luminous, or elevated, found in artifacts from cultures that have never had contact. Figures with wings, helmets, discs on the head, or surrounded by halos that indicate power coming from up. Historians call this mythology. But when mythology repeats itself in continents apart, begins to sound less like imagination and more like memory shared. Memory of what? From who? If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may be here. One of the most fascinating examples is found in Sumerian artifacts, small cylinders with engravings showing figures manipulating circular instruments, holding objects that resemble modern tools or pointing to symbols celestial. Many of these designs are replicated centuries later in different cultures, like the figures of the Dogons in Africa, who guard astronomical knowledge advanced over stars, invisible to the naked eye. How traditions so distant can carry echoes of the same knowledge. Triangles and pyramids also appear as a universal enigma. From Egypt to Mesoamerica, from Indonesia to submerged structures like Yonaguni, the form triangular is repeated with an almost ritualistic precision. It's not just architecture, it's language, a language that points to the sky, as if the builders wanted to communicate something beyond humanity itself, or maybe remember something they had seen. Another recurring pattern are handprints, found in caves around the world. Hands spread out, painted, superimposed on ancestral walls. The hand is the first sign of I, recorded in matter. But why do they appear in caves that belong to peoples separated by tens of thousands of years? Would these humans have ancestors received similar instructions? Or would they be registering a presence that passed by, leaving marks to remind them that they were not alone? And then we come to the most mysterious of patterns, the repetitive numerical codes engraved on stones, ceramics, and structures over millennia. Sequences like 3, 6, and 9 appear on ancient objects, as if they carry sacred mathematics. Nikola Tesla, he said that these numbers were the key to the universe. Could it be a coincidence? Or math used by these cultures was a reflection of knowledge inherited from something greater? Something that, has it escaped our historical memory? It is impossible to ignore the feeling that these symbols were not created by chance. They carry a coherence that transcends continents and eras. It's as if humanity had received a common alphabet, even before writing was invented. An alphabet ancestor who guarded spiritual, scientific, and cosmic truths. And when we look for mysterious artifacts, we realize that they are not isolated pieces. They are fragments of the same lost book, a book written without paper, without ink, just with stone, metal, and time. And this leads us to the next reflection portal. If identical symbols appear in civilizations that have never met, then who taught humanity the first language? When we look at these impossible artifacts, something curious happens. The more as we advance in scientific explanations, the mystery deepens. It's almost as if they did not want to be understood by common logic, as if they were created to survive time, but not to fit into human narratives. And maybe it is. That's precisely why no one can fully understand them. They belong to our way of thinking, but to the way of remembering. The first reason for why these artifacts remain indecipherable is simple and disconcerting. Lacks context. We imagine that every civilization develops from the simple to the complex, but the past doesn't always work like that. When we find an object sophisticated in an era that should be primitive, we say, it doesn't make sense. Maybe the problem is not in the object, but in the mental model we use to analyze it. We try to fit each discovery into a strict timeline, but what if history wasn't linear? What if humanity had experienced cycles of rise and fall, leaving tracks that survive only as scattered fragments? Another reason is the fragility of human memory. We do not have continuous records of all cultures that once existed. Wars, catastrophes, migrations, and climate change erased entire languages, entire traditions, forms of knowledge so profound that today we only recognize its echoes in repeated symbols. When we find an artifact mysterious, we are not seeing the origin of the object. We are seeing the rest, what is left of greater knowledge. It's like trying to reconstruct an entire book from one page torn. But there is something even deeper: human resistance to the unknown. Many challenging discoveries were treated as errors before being accepted. Whenever an artifact contradicts traditional history, a collective impulse arises to minimize, ignore, or reinterpret. Not out of bad intention, but out of instinct. The unknown threatens stability of the narratives that give us security. It is easier to fit an artifact impossible in a limited explanation than to open the door to the vast and immeasurable. There is also the idea that perhaps these artifacts were not made for us, maybe have been left as seeds, awaiting a consciousness capable of understand them. Memory seeds, seeds of awakening, the mechanism of Antikythera, the mysterious discs, the objects embedded in ancient rocks, all seem to carry the same vibration. You didn't start where you think, and when something whispers this to the soul, even without words, we feel a familiar discomfort. Because, in deep down, it seems true. If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may be here. An even more intriguing possibility is that these artifacts belong to civilizations that did not leave writing, but left technology. We know that some people express their knowledge through stone, not paper. Others transmitted wisdom through rituals, not books. Still others encoded their mysteries in symbols, spirals, snakes, triangles, as if to guarantee that something essential would survive even if everything else was lost. But perhaps the deepest reason for our misunderstanding lies in the fact that we use the mind to analyze what was created with consciousness. And consciousness cannot be explained. You can see. Some artifacts seem to carry an energy that is not just historical but spiritual, as if they were portals, points of intersection between worlds, between times, between layers of reality. Objects that do not behave like objects but like reminders. Reminders that humanity is not just biology but memory, no only matter but spirit. And so, faced with all these enigmas, the inevitable question arises: why have these artifacts come to us now? Why do we only find them now, precisely at the moment when our consciousness collective begins to expand? Again, perhaps because this is the right time to remember, to reconnect, to bring together the pieces scattered over millennia. And that brings us to the culmination of this journey. If these artifacts are fragments of a larger story, what is the role of our generation in finally understanding it? At the end of it all, when we piece together every fragment, every symbol, every impossible artifact, we realize that we are not just looking at old objects. We are looking at mirrors. Mirrors that reflect not what we were, but what we forgot to be. And in this silent moment between one discovery and another, we understand that the real question it was never, how was this done, but why did it come to us? Because every mysterious artifact is a door that does not open to the past, but inside. When we hold an object whose meaning no one understands, we feel something strange, almost familiar. It is as if the soul recognizes something that the mind can't translate, as if an ancient memory stored in deep layers of silence awakens slowly, like the first glow before dawn. Perhaps these artifacts were not left to a specific civilization, maybe have been left to a state of consciousness. For a moment when the humanity was ready to look beyond the surface, beyond chronology, beyond comfortable explanations, and perhaps that moment is now. If this journey has touched something inside you, sign up and follow us. Your soul can be remembering the path, because when we look at these objects forgotten in time, we realize that they were not buried by chance. They were waiting for someone to found, waiting for someone to ask the right question, waiting for someone listen to what they always tried to say. Some of these artifacts carry geometries that speak of harmony. Others bring symbols that speak of origin. Still others seem to emit a kind of call silent, as if inviting humanity to awaken from a long sleep. And perhaps, at the hear this call, let us realize that we are not rediscovering the past, we are rediscovering ourselves. And so, faced with the vast mystery that permeates everything, one last question emerges, softly like the wind that passes through ages. What if what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the soul haven't you forgotten yet?